And with that, we're going to move on to our plenary. This is called We're Not Tired of Winning. Celebrating Trump administration victories and continuing the momentum. Really thrilled to have each of our panelists with us today. I'm going to introduce the moderator, Anthony LaBruna. He is Executive Director of America Principles Project, formerly worked for Senator Chuck Grassley and other members of Congress. Most recently, he served as White House liaison to the U.S. Department of Commerce in the first Trump administration. I know APP is so fortunate to have him, and we're very fortunate to have him moderating this next panel. Anthony?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you here in this beautiful city, Indianapolis. We are so excited. We have a great panel, all different walks of life in serving the president and his agenda. So to kick us off, to introduce Chairman of the FTC, Andrew N. Ferguson. The chairman most recently served as a Solicitor General to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Prior to that position, he served as Chief Counsel to the U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell as Republican leader and as Republican counsel on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. He also practiced law at several Washington, D.C. law firms. He earned his undergraduate degree and law degree from the University of Virginia. And after law school, the chairman clerked for Judge Karen L. Henderson on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
Clap for that.
Our next panelist, Jack Mantua. Jack currently serves as the Senior Associate Director in the White House Office of Public Liaison, where he helps lead outreach and engagement efforts across key national coalitions. He previously served on the 2024 Trump-Vance campaign, the 2024 Republican National Convention, and held the role as Executive Director of Strategy Coalitions on the 2020 Trump campaign, where he played a pivotal role in building relationships across the conservative movement. Our next is Terry Schilling, President of American Principles Project. He is responsible for developing and implementing APP's strategy, messaging, and political activity at the state and federal level. Since taking the reins at APP, Terry has overseen the growth and premier national organization dedicated to the family and politics. In 2021, he founded APP's Big Family Initiative, which aims to make the family the most influential and powerful self-interest group in Washington. Through APP's Super PAC, he has also directed numerous elections efforts across the country. Terry worked for several pro-family political leaders, such as Senator Sam Brownback from Kansas, Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey, and Terry's proudest moment is running his father's campaign for Congress, former Congressman Bobby Schilling of Illinois 17.
Nice.
He is also the proud father of 7 children and his wife, Katie, who live in Virginia. And our final panelist, Jennie Lichter. Jennie Lichter assumed the office of President of March for Life Education and Defense Fund in February of 2025, where she directs the organization's commitment to restoring the culture in life in the United States, most notably through the March of Life in Washington, D.C., held every year. During the first Trump administration, Jennie served in the White House as a deputy assistant to the president, deputy director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. She has also previously worked in the Office of Legal Policy in the U.S. Department of Justice. She formerly served as an in-house counsel in Washington, D.C., and as Deputy General Counsel to Catholic University of America. Jennie graduated from the University of Notre Dame and from Harvard Law School, and earned an MPhil Theology Religious Studies in the University of Cambridge in the UK. She and her husband, Brian, have 3 young children. We'll start with the chairman first. Chairman, what's the biggest win for social conservatives in these first few months in the Trump administration?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here in Indianapolis. My grandmother's family is actually from Indianapolis, so it's nice to be back. I'm going to leave sort of the specific policy victories to my colleagues here on the panel. I've spent much of my career, I was a judge, vetter, picker, and confirmer. And having clerked on the Supreme Court, and then as Solicitor General of Virginia, having fought the Biden administration on issue after issue after issue, personnel is policy, and the biggest win for social conservatives is that President Trump won the election, threw the Democrats out of their offices, and replaced them with the people he is replacing them with. Every outrage that was inflicted on the country in the previous administration was not sort of a ineluctable requirement of the law or of a rule. It was decisions made by people sitting in offices backed by the president, and they're gone. And the president has put people who are committed to his agenda, to his golden age, and to making this country safe, happy, and healthy for American families. That is the biggest difference. I mean, just replacing, having gone up against the Biden DOJ so many times, replacing Merrick Garland with Pam Bondi. I said this at a different consequence. It is like replacing the Eye of Sauron with the Tower in Minas Tirith. It is just a huge victory for Americans. And, we were up against the Civil Rights Division all the time, who were constantly trying to impose DEI and affirmative action when Virginia was trying not to do it. And putting Harmeet Dillon at the head of the Civil Rights Division, I cannot tell you, night and day does not describe the difference. So in my view, the biggest win for social conservatives is also the biggest win for everybody else, which is President Trump's personnel running the government.
Jennie, I'll go with you next. What are the big wins that have taken place in this first few months of the Trump admin?
Thanks, great question. So of course, President Trump and his team are totally crushing it, and I have been cheering on so much of what they've been doing. But my biggest win, personally and professionally so far, is the president's strong start out of the gate on pro-life policy, right? And this is, I think, especially significant coming off of a campaign where, I'm just going to speak to the elephant in the room on pro-life policy, there was some mixed messaging, right, during the campaign that made a lot of people, including probably some of us, a little bit uncomfortable. My view then, as a former Trump White House staffer, and I shared this widely at the time, was this is a man who governed as the most pro-life president in American history, and the policy agenda for the second term is so far, or was at the time, blank. So let's take a step back, take a deep breath, and wait and see what he does once he holds the presidency again, right? That was my approach. And I have to say, what they came out with, right from the start has been pretty good. It's been a pretty strong start on pro-life policy, so I'm just going to mention a few highlights. One is the presence of the vice president at the March for Life in January, right? Huge win for the movement. The march this year was 4 days after the inauguration. I'll just peel back the curtain a little bit and let you all know kind of how that transpired. The Sunday before the march, so in other words, the day before the inauguration, I was on my Peloton while my 3-year-old was napping, as we do, right? You got to take your moments. And my phone rang with an unidentified phone number. I picked it up. It was someone from the VP's incoming team saying the vice president would love to come to the March for Life if you'll have him. And I said, of course, we actually sent him an invitation, but maybe it didn't reach him because you guys don't work in the White House yet. It was that sort of funny interim time. Anyway, long story short, we were delighted, of course. And I said to his communications team and his chief of staff at one point, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the context here. Do I have this right, that the March for Life is going to be the vice president's first event after the inauguration festivities? And if that's true, can I say that, or would you all prefer to kind of shape the narrative in a different way, right? I wanted to defer to them and their preferences. They said, yes and yes, this is going to be his first event, and tell whoever you want, because this is where he wants to be, right? That in other words, that was a deliberate choice made by the vice president himself, that he wanted to start his vice presidency standing alongside the pro-life movement and giving a banger of a speech that some of you probably remember if you were there, where he just, flatly declared America is a pro-life, pro-woman, pro-family country, right? And that set the tone for this presidential administration and I hope and believe J.D. Vance's political future, right? So that was huge. We were so thrilled to host him. Even more importantly, though, even more important than the vice president coming and the wonderful video that President Trump sent to the march while he was on the road that day visiting, I think he was at the flood zones in North Carolina and then flying across the country to the California wildfire sites on that same day because he wanted to prioritize those things in his first week. Even more important than their presence was what they did kind of surrounding the march, right? So they used the March for Life as the fulcrum or the sort of like hook on which to hang their initial pro-life policy achievements. And I have some notes on this because there's so many, I don't want to leave them out, but just the quick list of what they accomplished in those first few days. The evening before the march, President Trump pardoned 23 pro-life Americans who had been unjustly targeted by the Biden administration for praying outside abortion clinics, right? These were moms, they were grandmothers, right? They were peaceful pro-life demonstrators. They had been sentenced in some cases to years in prison, and they were all released by the president. So thanks be to God for that. The White House publicly declared its support for what was this year's March for Life vote. So every year, the House and the Senate vote on a piece of legislation surrounding the march. This year, it was the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and the White House took the step of issuing a formal statement of support. It's called a SAP, a Statement of Administration Policy. So that was huge. The White House dismantled all of the bad Biden stuff, or a lot of the bad Biden stuff, right? They took down reproductiverights.gov, a government website kind of pointing people towards abortions. They stopped the Biden policy of using taxpayer dollars to fund abortions for military service members and abortion travel for military service members. President Trump signed an executive order reaffirming the Hyde Amendment. In other words, no federal funds for abortions. They rolled back all of the Biden team's efforts to weave abortion promotion into foreign policy and foreign aid, right? That's gotten a lot of attention. There were a couple policy initiatives that first week aimed at that, at basically getting the U.S. out of the business of using our foreign aid dollars to promote abortions around the world, which is what we've been doing for the last 4 years. A number of these things happened. I think a couple of the EOs the president signed on Air Force One while he was flying over the country towards California that afternoon. And then my friends in the White House were texting me, it's official, you can tell people. And so I was able to let our 800 people at our gala that night know that the president had just taken these strong pro-life actions. And there was an incredible standing ovation. People love this stuff. And then I was able to tell my friends in the White House, please let the president know that there is a constituency for this kind of strong and bold pro-life action. His people love this, and we want to see more of it. And of course, we have continued to see more of it right up until a couple weeks ago, where Congress, with the White House's support, defunded Planned Parenthood from receiving taxpayer money. Huge precedent-setting win, and again, just wouldn't have happened without the president's support for taking that historic step. So I think we've seen just incredible win after win after win on pro-life policy.
Well, thank you, Jennie. Great answer for that. Now, Jack, you have a very unique role. You are in the White House. You are serving. This is, you came off the campaign. Now you're serving in President Trump's second administration in the Office of the Public Liaison. What's your guys' big takeaway of the major victories these first few months?
Yeah, sure. So we just hit the 6-month mark a couple days ago, and it's honestly been a whirlwind. It's every week there's another win. It's nonstop. So to pick one, I think would be kind of tough. I just want to highlight some of what I think are some of the biggest wins that the president has accomplished so far. I mean, right out the gate, he banned men from participating in women's sports. He is protecting women's sports across the board. And we saw that continue just a couple weeks ago when they signed the UPenn deal, which was a huge deal for female athletes. So those are two of the big ones. I'd also say establishing the Faith Office as part of the Domestic Policy Council. The president truly believes that faith deserves to have a policy perspective. In the past, it was in my office, OPL, which is great. We did a lot of outreach, to the groups, and there was a lot of good work that was done. But the president has actually prioritized faith being something that needs to be a policy focus. Along those same lines, the Religious Liberty Commission has been absolutely incredible. So we're very excited about that. Abolishing the Department of Education. I mean, that has been a decades-long promise to conservatives, and we are actually doing something about it this time. So could not be more excited about that. And then lastly, the one big beautiful bill getting passed just a couple weeks ago. I mean, not only did that deliver tax relief to everyday Americans, secure the border, but as Jennie mentioned, the defunding of Planned Parenthood just could not be a bigger win for the conservative movement.
Well, thank you, Jack. Well, Terry, you're in a unique situation here too. You know, you're leading an outside group who have really, been on the pulse of what's going on in the country with the transgender movement to women's sports. What are some of the major victories that you see?
Well, I think this panel is fantastic, by the way. I don't know why I'm up here with such amazing people. Look, I'll take a 30,000-foot view because everyone up here has listed off several achievements. The defensive crouch on the culture war is over, right? It's over. You have a president, Jennie just kind of ended with this, he defunded Planned Parenthood. You know how long we've been trying to defund Planned Parenthood? You know how touchy of a third rail that issue has been for so long? Trump showed us how to win the culture war, and we're no longer in a defensive crouch. We're no longer apologizing for not being tolerant enough about mutilating and sterilizing children. We're no longer apologizing for putting men into girls' sports and not being okay with that. We are bold. I will tell you, the amount, just the other day, Jack didn't list this, but I will for him. The Olympic Committee just came out and said that they're going to go along with President Trump's agenda on women's sports, kicking men out of it. The amount of victories that are coming up every single day from this Trump administration and from Republicans in Congress is so much, it's overwhelming. It's borderline discombobulating to keep up with every single victory that he's getting. I'm not exaggerating either. And I feel like that is the most important aspect of the entire fight, was getting rid of this defensive crouch. Why were we ever apologizing for practicing our religious freedom? Why were we ever apologizing for not being okay with redefining marriage? Why were we ever apologizing for people to do evil things and not being okay with that? So I'll take the 30,000-foot view here and say that the biggest victory is the overall victory, which is that we're not afraid anymore. We're not afraid to punch back. We're not afraid of our convictions anymore. Republicans have learned all of this, and they've learned it from President Trump.
Well, Terry, you brought up victories. We're having policy victories left and right with this administration. How do we get there? What's the political side? How did this come to fruition, from the 2020 campaign where the president didn't win his reelection to then run again, announce in 23 that he was going to seek the presidency, runs in 24. How did that politically shift? How did we end up where we are now in the social conservative movement?
The first thing I'll say with this is that I think that there's a truism out there that's only half true. And that truism is that politics is downstream of culture. The reality is much more different. Culture, first of all, in that pinwheel, I would say, with universities and our economics and corporations, is politics. Politics isn't downstream of culture, it's part of the culture. And Trump's shown this. In the early days, so we started polling and message testing around the whole transgender issue back in 2016. Bathrooms, sex changes for kids, men and women's sports. And these were all 65-30 issues. They were all winning. It was a no-brainer to support them. But there were no political action committees spending money on this. There was no one showing Republicans how to win on this. APP's whole theory, and I think the movement's theory now, is that if you can win in politics, you can pass policies. Seems not to be that quite rocket scientist-y. I just made up a word, actually. But anyway, you invest millions of dollars into campaign ads. You attack Democrats. When politicians are very simple creatures, they just want to get reelected. So the biggest change here has come. APP was spending millions of dollars leading up to 2020 and then 2022. But the breakthrough was when Republicans, led by President Trump, spent $225 million in the election attacking Kamala Harris and Democrats for their transgender extremism. That Kamala's for they, them, Donald Trump's for you ad, the Democrats' own after-action reports said that was the most powerful and effective ad. It was seen more times by more people. It was the most remembered ad of the 2024 cycle. What happened after 2024 when Trump won? We're seeing an entire avalanche of pro-family policies being championed. When politicians believe that a policy will help them win in the election, it'll take the jaws of life to separate them. So that's where the beauty is, that's where the magic's been, is by showing politicians how to win on the campaign trail using policies, not personalities, and then legislating from there. If they can win on policies, they can win in the elections.
Well, talking about implementing these policies, Chairman Ferguson, you guys just held this event at the FTC, kind of looking at the transgender industry and what they're doing. What were the big takeaways and what prompted this?
So I think everyone in here would agree that if someone was trying to sell you a supplement and they said that the supplement can cure cancer, grow your hair back, and make you lose 50 pounds, and that wasn't true, that someone should do something about that. I think we all agree on that. Well, the federal government actually has an agency whose literal job is to police those sorts of claims, and it's the Federal Trade Commission. And since the 1930s, when Congress made us the anti-deception watchdog for the federal government, the FTC has gone after people who make false representations about health claims. Pharmaceutical companies, snake oil salesmen, doctors, supplement makers, clinicians, people who promise the moon and can't deliver, the FTC goes after them. And, we're not regulating the practice of medicine. We're just treating everyone who participates in the healthcare industry like everyone else. If you're going to tell consumers something, you better be honest. You also have to tell them what the risks are. You can't promise them the moon and then not warn them, by the way, in order to get to the moon, you might lose an arm. As Solicitor General of Virginia, I had dealt and read about claims that especially children and parents who were encouraged, pressured, whatever you want to call it, to undergo so-called gender-affirming care by doctors were told, this will resolve the serious mental health crisis that your child is facing, and that there are very few side effects. It's a pause on puberty was the sort of classic explication of some of these treatments. And since 2011, a lot of the biggest backers of gender-affirming care were going to the press and saying, look, we always want to make sure that parents understand there's a very stark choice here, which is, and I'm quoting, this is not me, do you want a dead son or a live daughter? And the choice presented is, if you don't have your child as young as 10 undergo these therapies, they're likely to commit suicide. That's a pretty stark claim, and so you would expect a health claim like that to be backed by overwhelmingly substantial evidence. Before you start removing healthy body parts on the basis of that claim, there better be a lot of science backing that claim. And then in Scarametti against the United States, which was the Supreme Court's decision from a couple of weeks ago that said states do have constitutional authority to regulate and prohibit this sort of treatment for children. There's this important moment in the oral argument where Justice Alito, one of the greatest Americans alive, asked the lawyer that was representing the private plaintiffs attacking this law, hey, I just read the Cass report, and the Cass report says that there aren't any studies, there's no scientific evidence at all supporting the proposition that these treatments reduce the risk of completed suicide, reduce the risk of suicide. And the lawyer acknowledged, yeah, actually there's no scientific evidence backing that claim. The fundamental claim that doctors were telling the press that they were presenting to parents when they were presenting the choice was not backed by scientific evidence. And my view is that's just a health claim. It's just the type of thing that the FTC does all the time. It's in a politically charged issue, but if the FTC sort of turns a blind eye to potential deception because it's a politically charged issue, we are letting politics prevent the FTC from enforcing the laws that Congress has passed. And, my own view is if one of the political parties adopts deceptive health claims as part of its political ideology, that is not a reason for the federal government not to protect children and parents. So that was sort of the genesis of the workshop is, look, I'm reading in the press, not just in conservative outlets, I'm reading in the New York Times and the Atlantic magazine that there's a real disjunction between the science supporting these treatments and what people are saying to parents and children about these treatments. That sounds like a potential deception problem. And that's why the FTC held this workshop, is we want to figure out what's going on. So we heard from They're now adults, but children who underwent these therapies as children, who are telling us, no one told me what the effects of this were going to be, and no one told me that there wasn't science backing these claims. From parents who were in the same position, they had children in extremis suffering from real mental health crises and trauma, who then had doctors telling them, do you want a dead son or a live daughter? That's the choice. We heard from practitioners who've said, yeah, the science is not backing this. This is a real problem. We heard from state regulators, including from the state of Alabama, that sued the Biden administration on this issue, got a bunch of documents from HHS that revealed that HHS was pressuring WPATH not to be upfront about what the science was revealing because they were worried about the political consequences of the science coming to life. The Biden administration, that's why I think, the people that were doing that are gone. This is why the replacement personnel is so important. But that was the genesis of this is, we're the anti-deception agency. If there's deception going on, we need to know. And this was the first step to figuring out what's going on in these markets.
Well, Chairman, you mentioned there that the left uses a tactic, basically, of pushing medical, right? And there really has been a runway for them to kind of work this way into the trans issue, and kind of started with the pro-life issues, selling it as like a medical option to young people, to families. If you don't want a baby, this is a medical option. It's not. You're taking someone's life away. Jennie, with these major victories, with what Dobbs, the decision with Dobbs overturning Roe versus Wade, how are the pro-life movement looking at what's going to be going forward?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, speaking of not being tired of winning, I still am not tired of remembering that 3 years ago the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. I mean, it's just still... Thank you, Justice Alito, and the other justices in the majority for that. Just incredibly historic watershed moment, right? Dobbs was a huge win, as we all know. It's a win for babies. It's a win for American women. It's a win for the rule of law and good constitutional interpretation. It's a win for the president, right, who promised in his first campaign and all through his first term that he would nominate Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe, and he did it. I mean, that's incredible. And the president is a person who's committed to keeping his promises. We all know promises made, promises kept, right? In the first term when I was in the White House, and I'm sure now was sort of the watchword that drove the agenda. So that's an incredible promise kept by President Trump. And Dobbs, of course, changed the policy landscape entirely for the pro-life movement, right? At the state and federal level. And I'll just say a quick word about how I read the Dobbs opinion, and I think this is the right reading. I know there are some disagreements among friends, right, about how to understand what Dobbs did. Here's the key thing that Dobbs did, right? It said there's no constitutional right to abortion, right? In other words, it took an activist judiciary out of the business of determining abortion policy, right? Some folks have said, including some liberal scholars over the course of the 50 years of the Roe regime, right, that the regime that Roe and the Casey case, the Roe follow-on, set up, reads like a statute, right? The Supreme Court was essentially legislating in those cases. No more, no constitutional right to abortion. This is not something that the judiciary should be deciding. So the Dobbs case very deliberately was returning the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives, right? That's what Justice Alito came back to over and over again. The people's elected representatives are who gets to choose abortion policy. So this wasn't really a case about state versus federal authority. It wasn't, right? The case itself talked a lot about state law because it came up as an issue about state law. And the reason for that is under Roe, the states didn't have any authority to really, to protect unborn life, really, because again, their hands were tied by Roe and by Casey. So the Supreme Court was deciding a case about state authority. That was the context. But it wasn't answering a question, again, about federal role versus state role. It was answering a question about the power of the people. So in our new post-Dobbs universe, right, our elected representatives, primarily our legislators, right, and I would say also our executive branch, now have the power to decide what to do about abortion policy. And that does look different, right? We saw this in the few years after Dobbs. The pro-life movement sustained some losses, especially in the kind of that cataclysmic immediate aftermath of Dobbs, as the country was adjusting to our new regime, and as the media And the abortion, Big Abortion and all of their allies on the left were just flooding the airwaves with misinformation, right, about how women were going to be endangered by this and all of those sorts of things. But federalism means that we're going to live in a world in which some states do things differently than other states, right? And that's okay. That's part of the American experiment. Our job as people who believe in the dignity of life and want to protect women from these lies and misinformation is to enter the arena, right? To get in there and to be having the public conversation and to be trying to convince our fellow Americans to adopt pro-life, pro-woman, pro-family policies. And the momentum, I think, really, especially since this past year's presidential election, where Kamala Harris built her entire campaign on abortion, right? The Democrats bet big that was their path to victory. And thanks be to God, the American people told them, thanks but no thanks, that is not what we want. We're going back to the most pro-life president in history. And that, on the same day, we saw Florida and a couple of other states win their ballot initiatives to reject abortion on demand regimes. So I think the pro-life movement has a lot of momentum right now. And the landscape, again, because legislators at the state level and policymakers at the federal level now can really decide how protective they want to be of life. We have opportunities we've never had before, right? We have states where the unborn are protected starting just a few weeks into pregnancy. And that's incredible. And the more we are able to have the public conversation, push back against the misinformation and lies of the left, push back on misinformation about the safety. Chairman Ferguson has been talking about, pushing, kind of holding people accountable for deception about transgender interventions. We also need to be holding people accountable who are lying about the chemical abortion pill, for example, right? And today, Missouri stepped out to do just that, right, with a lawsuit against Planned Parenthood because of their lies about the safety profile of the chemical abortion pill. And we need more of that. So Dobbs was, a life-saving victory. It has already saved a lot of lives, and it also made the policy landscape just so much more sort of open to democratic engagement and kind of the rough and tumble of our democratic system, right? Where we, through our representatives, get to be setting abortion policy. So thanks be to God, we'll never get tired of saying that. Thanks be to God for the Dobbs decision and what it's done for this country and the momentum and the opportunities it's opened up for us.
Well, I'll say this. I'm going to jump back to you, Terry. We hear from the chairman about what the FTC is doing. We hear from Jennie. And there's a lot of the same tactics and lies that they used on the life issue, they're using on the trans issue. Now, ABP's kind of been in this fight for quite a while. You and your founding president, Frank Cannon, really dived into it with your team. What have you guys found? Walk me through the industry and the work that the chairman is doing and how that's affecting you guys and vice versa.
Look, this is let me be clear. The whole transgender industry of giving people puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and sex change procedures, it's a $4.5 billion emerging industry, but it's emerging no more. These guys are now having their clinics for children shut down because they're worried about people like Chairman Ferguson coming after them and enforcing justice. So what are the effects of taking essentially $4.5 billion away from the transgender industry? It's enormous. Part of the reason why we hear about the trans stuff so much, it's in all of the popular media outlets, the legacy media, is they take a small portion of that $4.5 billion and they reinvest that into PR campaigns, into legislation, into lobbying, into all of these terrible things that help enshrine their institutions into law. So we're taking away their profits. So they have less money to push this stuff. They have less money to sue us and to do all types of evil stuff. So winning begets more winning, right? I don't think that we often, as conservatives, think about these social issues or these culture war issues as financial, right? But Planned Parenthood getting $1 billion a year almost, or $780 million a year, that's a lot of money that they don't have to go out and fundraise. Right? We're taking away the free money and the free stuff. And by the way, a ton of that, I think the federal government spends $1.5 billion annually through Medicaid for sex change procedures. That's a crazy amount of money just for free. And in my opinion, I think most of you would agree, if you want a sex change procedure, you should maybe pay for it yourself. I don't know. I've got 7 kids. I have enough mouths to feed, let alone pay for other people's sex change procedures. But look, the winning begets more winning. We can start to reverse the tide. Now, the big question, though, and hopefully we'll get into this later, is What are the institutions that we can start building as conservatives, as Republicans? We need to start thinking more in terms of industry and finance. The whole APP, right, it's called big family. Big pharma, big oil, big tobacco. We're trying to make the family the most powerful special interest group in the country. And Family Policy Alliance, by the way, has been so critical of that. We're up to 27 states now that protect girls' sports. 27 states that have banned sex change procedures for minors. But the coolest fight, and I think where we'll see the most growth, is 23 states now require age verification for porn sites before they can deliver the content. 23 states. And by the way, because of President Trump's judicial nominees, we just won a major victory at the Supreme Court with the Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton. Right? We have been overcoming all of these terrible judicial rulings that have kept us from being able to fight. The worst part about Roe is it kept us from being able to actually pass legislation and make grounds for the unborn. And that was the same thing for the porn industry, which, by the way, it's $100 billion annually, globally. It's a lot of money we can start taking away from them. So success begets success, and we just need to start figuring out where we're going to start putting our money, where we're going to start building our institutions. I think it's the family, but I don't know what exactly that entails.
Well, to capitalize on that, Chairman Ferguson, you just brought up the Paxton case on the Supreme Court that we just won. The FTC also did an event looking and analyzing age verification. Again, what prompted that, but also, is this the new thing that conservatives and the conservative movement should start pushing behind to get this stuff done?
Yeah, so we held another big workshop on the attention economy, and age verification was an important question that we were considering. But the FTC enforces a lot of the laws that Congress has passed that are aimed at sort of protecting children online. The main one is the Child Online Privacy Protection Act from 1998, but that's from 1998. The internet's pretty different than it was in 1998. And the principal thing that COPPA is supposed to do is require a form of age verification for ages 13 and under as a prohibition on collecting the data of ages 13 and under. But everyone in this room has probably clicked on one of those age verification boxes. You just sort of like pick a date that has you older than 13 and off you go. Congress has debated repeatedly for the last several Congresses, all sorts of additional legislation to confront the reality that children face online. And it's not just about age verification. That's an important step, but it's about like design features of social media that create a sort of unknowing incentive for children to have their eyes glued to the screen sort of eternally. It's the presence of screens in schools. For those who haven't read it, Claire Morell wrote a great book recently called The Tech Exit, and one of the issues that she was confronting for families that want to sort of break the bond between their children and the screen is you can control it in your own home, but you can't control it in your friend zones, and you can't control it in the schools. iPads are like ubiquitous in schools now. They're everywhere. They're just sort of shoved in front of kids, and we have all this sort of educational technology, and a giant industry makes tens of billions of dollars off of ed tech. And so these were questions that we were considering is, look, what does the FTC need to do that it's not doing? Enforcing COPPA, which the last administration did here and there, but we were being very, very intentional about bringing COPPA cases, including being willing to no one's ever litigated a COPPA case. We're more than ready to litigate COPPA cases. And then what other laws do we need? Our general, unfairness law plus COPPA can do some stuff, but the internet is a modern invention requiring modern solutions. Using a law from 1935 and 1998 is probably not going to get us where we need to go, just as a practical reality. And we need to have a debate amongst ourselves as Americans. Rather than sort of expecting bureaucrats to constantly fit square pegs into round holes and take old laws and try to modernize them through enforcement and rulemaking, and that's just what entrenches the deep state. We need to have a real debate amongst ourselves as Americans and tell our legislatures in the states and in Washington, like, this is the problem we see and this is how we want it fixed. And so that's what a lot of this was. But I think, part of this is, and I said it in my introductory remarks at both workshops, is This is an administration that treats the family as the principal organizing unit of American life, and that has oriented policy toward making America safe and healthy for families. And the work that we do at the FTC sort of across the board, the goal we constantly have in mind is, what can we do to make America better for American families? What can we do to make it easier to have children, to raise children? And obviously, look, I'm a law enforcer that focuses on commerce, but all of us engage in commerce basically every second of our lives. Your phones are probably engaging in commerce right now in your pocket and you're not really thinking about it. But that is how we've sort of oriented the FTC's enforcement mission is, what can we do with the laws that Congress has given us to make this country better for American families?
Well, and I'll say this, the FTC has really lent an ear to these outside groups working on these issues. You've been someone who's been an advocate, who want to come to the kitchen table, want to listen to these outside groups, and that's so important, which kind of gets me to my next topic. For Jack, you're in the Office of the Public Liaison. The FTC and their staff have done a phenomenal job with a lot of these outside groups, these coalitions, but that's really the heart of your job. They're the commerce focused, but for you guys, you are the front door of the White House. Explain to, everyone who doesn't know what OPL does, what you guys are all about, and what your main mission is.
Yeah, sure. So Anthony said it great. We like to call ourselves the front door to the White House, and what that really means is we engage with every external stakeholder who is not an elected official. That's everything from Fortune 500 CEOs down to small business owners, down to the conservative organizations and nonprofits in this room here. We are already working with a lot of you guys, APP, March for Life, Family Policy Alliance. I know there's a lot of other friends in this room that we've met with, but I want to say if we have not had the chance to meet yet, would love to engage with you guys. We want to work together as much as we can to advance the president's agenda, and that's really what it's about this time around. In the past, OPL has focused on constituency groups and have sometimes been a little bit more focused on re-election, but this time we kind of have the unique opportunity where we are not up for re-election this time around. We've got realistically a year and a half, hopefully 3 more years, to advance the president's agenda, cement his wins. But we want to work with you all as much as we can to get that done. A few ways to do that too. I know a lot of you are already engaging in this space, but as much as you can put out statements of support, write op-eds, put out media to the extent that you're able, that is hugely helpful. That was a big part of getting the One Big Beautiful Bill across the finish line. So just want to thank everyone in the room who played a role in that. And one other huge focus of our office this time around is everyday Americans and highlighting their stories. A lot of this began at convention last summer. I'm sure a lot of you were there, a lot of you saw, instead of having CEOs and politicians speaking at convention, we shared the stories of everyday Americans. It's one thing to say fentanyl's pouring across the border. We all know it is, but when you have someone who's lost their son or daughter to a fentanyl overdose, it really does help to move the hearts and minds, of the American people and help shape policy. We continued that a lot at the State of the Union this year, where we shared all sorts of stories. A lot of them were tragic stories of what happened under the Biden administration. I hope next year we can be sharing some positive wins of how people have benefited from President Trump's policies. But that's a huge part of what we're focusing on this time around. Caroline Levitt loves sharing these stories behind the podium. We love featuring these stories on social media. So to the extent that you're able, please do share any of those stories about how President Trump's policies are positively impacting the lives of everyday Americans. We really want to get that out as much as possible.
Well, Jack, you bring up the fact that this is his second term. Mm-hmm. You guys are not seeking re-election, and you've really been there every step of the way. In 2016, 2020, and 2024, now working in the White House. Can you tell us a little bit about something you noticed that is different between Admin 1, right? And I think this is historical. There's only one other president who has done this where they did not serve both terms back to back, and that was Grover Cleveland from Buffalo, New York, former governor of New York.
Anthony's very good at presidential history.
I love the presidents. I think every kid should know all 46, 47 presidents now. When I realize it's 46, we really count Biden. I wouldn't, is that auto pen. But what's something that you've noticed? You've been on the campaigns. You saw him in Trump 1. Now you're in Trump 2. You're in there in the office, in the EOB, working every day. What's something you can tell us you see that's different than Trump 1?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things is we've got the experience of an incumbent, but the excitement of a first-time president, which is a really, really unique position to be in. One of the biggest things, I think, is that the president actually understands how DC works. He came in last time around. He's a New York businessman. And, I think he thought he knew how politics worked, but was not really sure or was not really aware how vicious things could get. Last time we were dealing with Mitch McConnell in the Senate, Paul Ryan in the House. This time around, we have a Congress that is willing to work with us. They want to advance the president's agenda. They are advancing the president's agenda. I think that's really, the biggest thing that I have noticed that's different. Not that a lot didn't get done last time, but it has just been at such a rapid rate this time around. It's been incredible to watch.
And I think Trump had 4 years to think about what he wanted to do next, right? I say this truly, I don't know if he would have been as successful as a president in term 2 if it was back to back, right? He would have still had all these people going after him without the ability to take 4 years off, kind of think through exactly what he wants to get done for this country, and then put his line on the line for all of us, with Butler, Pennsylvania, and then again another assassination attempt at his golf course, right? I don't know if he would have been as successful, but something that's interesting, Jennie, you were in the first administration. Mm-hmm. Now Jackson and Admin 2, you guys are really humming, but Jennie, you were in the first administration. He didn't know Washington. He really didn't have a lot of political allies on the Hill. He hadn't really built up that reputation in Washington and hadn't built that rapport. What's your thoughts on this second administration?
So again, they're totally crushing it, and one difference, I love the way that you characterized, by the way, sort of being, the experience of an incumbent, but the excitement of a first-term president. I love that. It seems like it encapsulates really well kind of the momentum of this term. I think another difference is the people and the internal dynamic, and this goes to the point we talked about earlier about how much people matter, right? Personnel is policy is a kind of a classic DC saying, and people matter, not just the difference between a Democrat administration and a Republican administration, but I think this administration is staffed differently. In the first term, and just for context, I was in the DOJ in the first half of the first term, and then came to the White House in early 2019. So essentially, almost the whole back half, I was in the White House at DPC. I'm happy to say a word about DPC if that would be helpful.
DPC?
But okay, so we'll just do a little detour on White House policymaking because, as you reminded me earlier, people don't always even know what DPC is. So here's your little primer on the White House kind of policy universe. I hope this is helpful for anyone who interacts with the White House or reads the news about what they're up to. The policy universe within the White House is divided essentially into 3 parts. There are 3 core policy councils. And then in any given administration, there's sort of satellite fiefdoms, right? Jared Kushner ran his own kind of policy fiefdom in term 1, and Ivanka Trump had a small but very important and high-profile policy portfolio as well. But there's 3 core policy councils that last from administration to administration. They were established years and years ago by executive orders. That's the National Security Council, which may or may not still exist. It's hard, they're going through a transition season at the National Security Council, but typically there's a National Security Advisor in the White House who runs a huge apparatus, right? That takes care of foreign affairs, military matters, international relations, defense, right? That all lives in the NSC. The domestic side is divided between the NEC, which is the National Economic Council, and the DPC, the Domestic Policy Council. NEC has essentially like a carve-out, right? So they handle tax-related issues. They work with the Department of Commerce. They do anything essentially that has to do with finances, right? DPC has everything else. It's essentially a catch-all portfolio. So when I was a deputy on DPC managing our staff, each of whom had a more kind of a set policy lane, I was supervising policy initiatives coming out of probably a dozen federal agencies, everything from HUD to education to labor to HHS to the Indian Affairs side of Interior lives with DPC, to religious liberty, as Jack mentioned, the equivalent of the Faith Office, really our religious liberty portfolio lived in DPC last time, even though the Faith Office lived in OPL. We handled the pro-life policy matters, pro-family stuff. It's a huge, huge policy portfolio. DPC is headed by an assistant to the president, which is the most senior staff level in the White House, and then has a kind of staff team under them. The head of DPC this time around is Vince Haley, who's a longtime Trump staffer. He was a speechwriter in the first term, and then policy director, I believe, on the campaign. Vince is fantastic, social conservative to his core, a person of really deep faith, a father of a big family. Just can't say enough good things about him and his commitments. And then he has a great team around him. So that's DPC. They are essentially sort of captaining the policymaking ship and directing, sometimes working with, but sometimes being pretty directive of the agencies, right? As it should be, because the staff, the political appointees across the administration, all work for the same guy, and everyone's authority, to the extent that political appointees have any authority, it all derives from the president's authority, right? He is the one and only one person who was elected by the American people to head the executive branch. Everyone else's authority derives from the president, right? That's the unitary executive theory. In the first term, it didn't always work that way, right? There were a number of agency staff, and this includes some political appointees, up to and including even some heads of agencies and cabinet secretaries at different points in the first term, who had their own agenda that was at times not consistent with, or even to some degree opposed to, the president's policy agenda. We spent so much time in the first term essentially fighting amongst ourselves, right? Where the White House had a goal, folks in the agencies didn't really want to do it. And although in the end they have to, because again, they work for the president, it can be a very lengthy and inefficient and unpleasant process getting to a policy outcome when your own team, again, is sort of like gumming up the works or not willing to really work with you. The president, I think, at times has talked about that, right? The way the first term was staffed and the lessons that he learned along the way. When I got to the White House in early 2019, my then boss, the head of DPC at the time, handed me 2 priority projects right out of the gate that he was like, we're losing our minds over here. We've spent 2 years trying to resolve whether the administration is going to keep funding research using aborted baby body parts. Obviously, the answer was no, but it took 2 full years for the administration to be able to act on that, right? And then there was another kind of regulatory religious freedom issue that had also been just like a source of constant infighting for 2 years, right? And he said to me, we got to get this done. Like, it's just time to get this done. We can't keep wasting time. The president made these promises. We're going to do it. And we did it, but it was very painful. I don't think, from what I can tell, that you all have that happening to nearly as much of a degree this time around. The president knew what he wanted to get done. I think they have a different way of sort of sifting personnel this time, right? And this team seems to me like they are 100% dialed in, from every cabinet secretary on down to every junior political staffer that's being brought into the agencies in the White House. They are dialed in and unified, knowing what the president's agenda is, and everyone has their marching orders that, hey, this is what we're doing. You are either helping or you're out, right? It looks to me from the outside like zero tolerance for the kind of just like crap that ate up so much time in the first term. So I'm a little bit jealous, because it must be so much fun to just be able to bang out these wins day after day after day. I mean, like you said, it's almost, I wouldn't say I'm tired of winning, but I, like Terry, sometimes feel some degree of whiplash. Like, wait, what just happened? You know, okay, on any given Tuesday, we're like changing the world, you know. It's pretty cool. And that has a lot to do with the president's experience and the experience of his team, and that just incredible unanimity of vision, I think, in the policy teams in the White House and the folks in the agencies, and just the shared understanding about what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Well, we definitely know that Chairman Ferguson, his team, they're dialed in. He's young, he's youthful, he's got a lot of energy. I think it's another huge thing.
Yeah.
The cabinet is so energetic. You got Linda McMahon, you got Lutnick, you got Besson, you got all these people who want to go to work. You got the chairman, who's obviously doing a phenomenal job with his team. But Terry, you know, again, we have a couple minutes here, but a unique thing. You've never been in the administration. You've always been in the trenches, on the campaign side, on the policy side with APP. What's your takeaway from 2016 to 2020, and now seeing President Trump 24 to 28?
Well, Jack can't say this because he's actually a humble guy, but there really is an open door for us to go into the White House. I am not in the administration, but I feel like I am. I've been to the White House like 75 times. And it's only because President Trump has changed who he has in the White House. And it's also because They understand the importance of addressing these issues and of protecting children. But I'd say that the biggest change, again, I'm going to go back to the first answer I gave, which is the biggest victory. We're no longer apologizing for doing good. We're no longer apologizing for protecting children. We're no longer apologizing for protecting families. And we have an open door at the White House. And it's not, what was amazing to me is President Trump, I feel like he's hired like all of my closest friends. So like I'm not in the administration, but I have people like Jack and several others who are all throughout the administration who are all doing amazing work. My best friend, first intern I ever hired ever, works for Chairman Ferguson, John Schweppe. Right? He was on my dad's campaign back in 2010. The whole administration is full of very good, very serious, very devoted people who just want to save our country, who just want to stop all the pain and suffering that the Democrats and the progressives have inflicted on us. They're reversing the tide. And so it's just, we have an open door at the White House, and I don't think you can appreciate that enough.
True, and so, for our final question here, Chairman Ferguson, you've talked about what you guys have already worked on, but can you give the audience and us, what's next for you guys and at the FTC?
Yeah, so on the question about gender affirming care, we're going to open a public comment period this week, taking all the stuff that we learned from that workshop and trying to understand it more so that we understand where we need to prioritize enforcement. And when that goes live, you can go on the FTC's website. It'll be right there. I encourage you all to respond. And just as a general matter, the left is fond of the saying, this is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. The president ran on pretty clear campaign promises, surrounded himself by people who support him and those promises, and then said, go get it done, and no excuses. And that has been, a definite change from the previous administration. You sort of feel like the administration is peopled with people who want the president's agenda to succeed come hell or high water, including at the FTC. And so, our mission is going to be bring as many cases as we can that make this country a better place for families to live. We're a law enforcement agency, and so I can't preview specific stuff. All I can say is the next couple months, watch our website and watch the news.
Cool.
Jack, final words?
Yeah, I think there's been no shortage of momentum. The president had a clear mandate from the American people, and he is delivering on that with promises made, promises kept. I think one of our big focuses coming up is going to be selling the message of the One Big Beautiful Bill. And as much as you all can help with that in the States, with your networks on Capitol Hill, we're going to need that because this really is the president's agenda. And we've got it signed into law, but if we can't sell that, as good as things are right now, if we lose the House and we lose the Senate, it's all over. I mean, we can have 4 years of this if we can sell this bill, but if not, these wins that we've been seeing day in and day out, it's not going to be able to keep up, unfortunately. So as much as you all can help selling that bill, we really, really appreciate it. It is truly the president's agenda. We're looking forward to more and more wins, but that's going to be one of our big focuses right now.
Jenny, final words.
Final words. Can I make a request of Chairman Ferguson? While you're, again, I alluded to this earlier, but while you're investigating deceptive trade practices, you might want to look into the chemical abortion pill. Just a suggestion. I'm here to help. Call on the March for Life if you need any information, or others in the audience. No, final words. Again, I guess I'll just go back to the panel title, right? We're not tired of winning, and the great news is we're not done winning because there's a lot of incredible achievements ahead. This team, again, they're not going to lose a step. There's so much left to do in the pro-life space, in terms of protecting kids, protecting the integrity of athletics, making the economics work better for American families. I mean, it really feels like we're entering a golden age for the United States, and the timing couldn't be better as we get ready to celebrate the 250th birthday of our beloved country next year. So thank God for President Trump and that he won this election in November, so that we're celebrating with him and not in a Kamala Harris administration. But I couldn't be happier with how things have gone so far, and appreciate being able to be a part of the conversation with the White House. So thank you, Jack, for the open door.
Terry, final words.
Let's just go out and get it. I mean, let's just go and win. Let's go, guys. We are so close to final victory. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amanda Banks. Thank you very much for listening.